Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are all having an amazing day so far. So in this video we will be creating a very huge modern mansion, and we're actually inspired by a celebrity who goes by the name of Michael Jordan, who is actually a former basketball player. And I just really love the way his house looked and how extravagant and elegant it looked. And this was actually a house that was recommended by someone in the comment sections below who suggested that I should build this build, and I actually looked into it and considered it as a good choice because I just really liked how huge and extravagant this mansion was. And since we do build quite a lot of these big sort of like builds on the channel, I feel like why not like sort of give it a go and see if I can like recreate it, especially because his house looked relatively complex with a lot of different like pieces and curves and whatnot, especially with incorporating that huge indoor basketball area and whatnot. So far we're actually starting off with the shell, which is actually quite interesting. We have a very huge sort of like skinny sort of shell going on right now, and this actually does expand as we progress through the video, but it kind of has a very interesting shape in the sense that the front entrance of the home kind of takes like a while to like get into, if that makes sense. So we have quite an interesting sort of roadway that sort of leads into the sort of like area of the home. So it's kind of like all gated and like closed off, which will kind of make sense about like what I'm trying to say as we progress later on in the video. But it's sort of just like has the main entrance like further away from the front of the lot, if that makes sense, which I feel like is kind of a cool way of sort of creating houses in The Sims. I feel like I never really thought of doing something like that and just like having an interesting garden or some sort of like interesting sort of driveway incorporated at the front of the build. So yeah, I feel like this build definitely gave me sort of like a good idea of how I can create different types of entrances and whatnot. So far we are going on with the roofing of the entire build, and we're kind of like speeding up here and like skipping some parts of the roofing, mainly because there was just like a lot of complex pieces to place all together just to make all of this build work really well. And what is really interesting about this build in particular is that one side of the house is actually on 2 stories, whereas like the other half is sort of like 1 story, and I just felt like that was kind of interesting and it created an interesting dynamic with creating this build. But yeah, there's a ton of space in this build. I believe there's about like 7 or 8 bedrooms in this entire build, and we do also have a gym as well as a very nice laundry room, and we do have a very spacious office along with a 2nd floor sort of seating and living area which incorporates a piano. And so far we're actually doing the outdoor sort of like garden area, and initially I used some floor pieces and sort of created this like interesting curve because in Michael Jordan's mansion he does have a very huge curved pool in his backyard, and I wanted to recreate something like that in The Sims because I just felt like that looked kind of cool, and it was also incorporating that new sort of like curved pool function. So I thought like it would be a nice interesting addition to this build, especially since we had so many curves going on throughout the build. And I actually ended up changing all of that flooring into terrain paint, mainly because it just was easier to work with, and you can't place a curved pool on curved sort of flooring, which is kind of weird. I feel like it would make sense to do that, but unfortunately you can't do that. But I just feel like it was such an interesting sort of backyard area that I really felt interested in recreating. And so far we pretty much have the entire shell sort of complete. And if you guys do see me saving quite often and like saving it to the gallery and whatnot, it's because I was just worried about losing the entire build because it has happened quite often and I just wanted to prevent that from happening. So yeah, don't mind me saving. But yeah, so far we're actually working on where the front entrance would actually be, and we're actually just like creating the original terrain paint that you would see in the original home, where there's like a lot of pathing and just like a lot of a very nice interesting layout going on throughout the entire home, which I feel like ties it in really well. And it was kind of interesting to sort of just like create some sort of gateway as if it was like some sort of like private community, especially when building on the 64x64 lot in Brindleton Bay, which I believe is just one of my favorite lots, as I built in this lot 3 times already in the past like 2 weeks. So yeah, I just really enjoy building in this particular lot, mainly because I just really like how it has that very nice environment around it, and it's kind of like secluded, especially with that front sort of extravagant entranceway that we have going on with the actual lot. Just placed like a bunch of trees throughout the entire build because I just felt like it looked really nice, and the original build was sort of like in this foresty sort of area where it was very secluded from the outside, and it was just like really private and covered up, which I wanted to sort of get with this build as well. It was kind of just like this really extravagant sort of private sort of residential lot, if that makes sense. So I wanted to recreate that as much as possible in The Sims, and I just feel like it turned out really well, especially with like the tree placement and whatnot. And you might notice that there is quite a lot of trees, and stuff so far, but we do end up reducing it and sort of just like making it feel a bit more realistic later on down the video. But so far we pretty much have the entire shell laid out, and especially like with all the roofing and stuff like that. And I really love the really dark roofing. Like the black really does contrast really well with the plain white walls that we have going on throughout the entire exterior, and I just feel like it works really well with making the house stand out. And I did actually align all of the sort of like perimeter of all of the terrain paint with this like white pebble sort of terrain paint, just to like outline it, which kind of made it look a bit more interesting, and it did make it stand out a lot more rather than leaving it like plain and blank, which I feel like turned out a lot better than it would have been had I not done that, if that makes sense. And I did align quite a lot of these shrubs along each of the sort of like pavements and like terrain paint like walkways and whatnot, because I just felt like it made it look a bit more sophisticated and a bit more neat, if that makes sense. Yeah, I just feel like it tied in the home a lot more. And also regarding the new expansion pack that's coming in the next few days, what do you guys think about it? Do you guys think about picking it up, or is it not something that you guys want? Let me know what you guys think about it in the comment sections below, because I'm kind of thinking of creating a specific build to do with life and death, maybe some sort of old looking castle or whatnot. But like, yeah, if you guys have any thoughts and suggestions of what you guys think I could build with that expansion pack and the build and buy objects that come with it, let me know what you guys think, and I will take it into consideration, just like how I did with this build in particular as well. But yeah, so far we're just adding a lot of greenery here and there, just trying to make it look lived in. And I do add a bunch of terrain paint around these trees and stuff as well, just to make it look a bit more realistic as well, especially with adding that soil terrain paint, which makes it really come alive. And I actually wanted to use this sort of like dark sort of green grass sort of terrain paint throughout the entire sort of like lot, because I just feel like it makes it look a bit more expensive for some reason. I guess it's because it's like a very bright green color. It kind of makes it look as if it's like some sort of like healthy grass, or if it's like well taken care of, as if like it's been like lawn mowed and whatnot. And I just wanted to replicate something that I've been seeing in these images and like a lot of these like fancy houses have, which is like these really bright and green sort of like grasses which look really well taken care of. And I feel like in a mansion like this, I feel like it kind of makes sense to have a bright green sort of grass that goes throughout the entire build. And you might notice that I've actually placed a lot of this sort of like green terrain paint that is like straight on top of like the edge of the lot, which kind of like makes it look a bit weird. But I did actually go throughout the entire build and sort of just like make it blend as much as possible. So I did actually remove certain parts that were like too harsh around the edge of the lot, because that just like kind of makes it look a bit more realistic, rather than having a really harsh bright colored sort of like green texture and then it flows into like a sort of like a more dull color. As you guys can see right now, I'm just like kind of like removing the edge parts of it which are closer towards the edge of the lot line, just so it kind of like blends in a lot more with the actual environment that it's in. Especially if you do plan on downloading it but not using it in Brindleton Bay, you could definitely like incorporate it in other 64 by 64 lots without having any issues with incorporating it. But yeah, moving on to placing the windows onto this huge mansion, I actually decided to go with some of the Greenhouse Haven glass windows, mainly because I just really like the way they look. You could obviously substitute those windows for the regular sort of floor to ceiling singular sort of like glass windows that we can utilize from the base game. However, I just wanted to go with the Greenhouse Haven ones, mainly because they just add a bit more detail to the house, which I feel like makes it look a bit more interesting. And the original house actually had some parts of the house sort of like going in with like a lot of columns and whatnot, and I didn't really replicate most of that, mainly because I just felt like it didn't really look that interesting or made a lot of sense for the Sims, especially because we can't really alter a lot of the sort of like floor and wall height. So I just wanted to like remain, I liked how it looked as it is right now, rather than like sort of like adding a lot of gaps and whatnot into the build. And we do actually have quite a lot of curves in this build, but they don't actually cause any issues, mainly because I didn't really use them in ways that would cause problems, if that makes sense. To accompany this huge outdoor area, I did also want to include some sort of like barbecue area with like a very nice fireplace that you can just like sit outside and like eat or like hang out in, which I feel like was kind of realistic, especially for a huge modern mansion like this. And I actually really love the planters that you see onto the left side of this build so far, which are sort of like in this very huge vase, which I believe came from the debug or live edit mode, which I just really love using. I just feel like it looks really extravagant and just like over the top. I feel like I might create a short later on down the line, just like showcasing some of my favorite plants or like specific objects that I like using, because I just feel like it kind of is a helpful way of showing people what kind of objects I like using, and I feel like certain people might be interested in that. But yeah, moving on to the interior, we're actually starting off with the kitchen, which I feel like has such an interesting shape, and I just really love how this entire kitchen turned out. So initially we start off with creating a lot of these like cabinetries on like the flat side of the walls, and I just feel like because this is such an open floor plan house, there's so many like cabinetry and like areas around this kitchen which I feel like make it look extravagant and very interesting. And I just love the contrast between each of the counters, especially with like the island counters and like the main counters. And I just really like mixing two different counters from different packs, because I just feel like it kind of gives a different vibe while keeping it like similar, if that makes sense. So they both have like a very simple like flat countertop, but the island living counters that are actually being used as the island counters in this build have that sort of like waterfall edge, which I love using because it's one of my favorite counter designs, which I really wanted to incorporate in such a luxurious mansion like this. And you might notice that there's actually a tree poking into the house, which is affecting like the left hand side of the kitchen wall cabinet. However, you will not have that tree when you download this build because it will be removed. So do not worry about that at all. Kind of really like the contrast that we have going on throughout this entire kitchen. And I just feel like the new kitchen set that is coming from the Life and Death expansion pack, I'm just really excited to utilize that because it's just so perfect with that marble sort of countertop along with that really modern fridge. It just looks like such a good expansion pack that would go really well with the rest of the kitchen sets that we have in the entire game as well. And of course I had to create a specific area of this build to incorporate that coffee machine because I just really love the utilization of that, and I just feel like it's just really realistic for a huge modern mansion like this. And although you guys haven't really seen like the sort of like layout or the floor plan of this home yet, you guys will see it as we progress later in the video, but we do have this very nice double staircase sort of situation that goes onto the second floor of the home. That was actually like displayed within the real home itself, so I kind of wanted to take something from that and sort of put it in this build as well. And we do also have a very nice sort of circular sort of dining table off to the side of the kitchen, but we do also have a very huge like sort of like formal dining area which we'll move on to later on in the video. And I came up with the idea of placing these shelves all together onto this curve just to like not leave it blank, and just it kind of just like fit really well, especially because there was like some sort of like bowls and like cups or whatnot within there, so it kind of like made sense to be close next to the kitchen off to the side of this curved dining area. And I just wanted to like populate it with a nice like sort of seating area, as well as like adding a nice shelf there which you can like populate with like some clutter or like some collectible objects, if that makes sense. And this is sort of like the formal dining area, which I really do love the way this looks, how it's like sort of secluded in its own sort of room, but yet again it's not, because it's in between like a very thin hallway, which I really do love. And you could just like access it directly from the kitchen, which I feel like is such a nice sort of like dining area, and it just looks off out into the distance of this very huge sort of curved room filled with like a lot of these very huge floor to ceiling glass windows, which I feel like work really well. And we do actually have quite a theme going on throughout this entire build, which is muted colors, but we're using a lot of like artsy sort of modern features throughout this entire build, mainly because that was sort of like what the original home was utilizing. So I wanted to replicate certain elements of that and incorporate that into my Sims build as well. And they also had a very huge and interesting looking living area, which I wanted to replicate as well. And certain color schemes that I actually noticed from that build was like this very dark wooden paneling sort of detailing that was going on throughout the entire build, whether it was in the offices or in the living spaces. And I wanted to also incorporate that in this build as well, which I feel like turned out really well, and it works really well with this entire build. I just feel like this build has a lot of colors and just like a lot of details going on throughout the entire space, which I feel like match and flow really well. And you guys will definitely see that throughout the tour, as well as like through the screenshots as well. And also make sure to stick around towards the end of the video for that tour if you guys are interested in checking out every single room in particular without sort of like seeing the build process, but rather just like viewing it as like a finished product. You guys can definitely check out the tour towards the end of the video if you guys are interested in that. And I also really love utilizing the Dream Home Decorator modular sort of cabinetry just to add a few details here and there around the entire like sort of fireplace and sort of living space area, which I feel like looked really nice and added a bit of details that looked a bit interesting. And I also really love utilizing this base game rug, and I just feel like it looks really like high quality, but it also has like a lot of detail into it, and it kind of like fits with the color scheme that we'll go going for throughout this entire build, which was like these muted colors or like a brown color or whatnot. It just had a lot of color choices that I was kind of like utilizing throughout this entire build. But onto the back side of this actual living space, we have the main sort of like office area, which is huge. I feel like this is a very big office area, and I feel like it's kind of like the biggest office area that I created, but I'm just really happy with how it turned out. I really do like that book nook paneling that came from that kit. I just feel like it looks really nice and just really modern, to be honest, rather than using like those really thin sort of wooden panelings. And I wanted to add a very nice sort of like seating area into this office because I just feel like it would have fit really well with how big this entire space was. Sort of just like a small like chill out hangout area, or if you wanted to like read a book or whatnot. And I added some of those book nook 2-seaters, which I feel like really tied the space in really well together, and also incorporated my favorite wall sconce, which came from the Growing Together expansion pack, because I just feel like it works really well with the color scheme that I have going on throughout this entire build. And I really do love using that base game vase because I just feel like it looks really modern and extravagant, especially because of that really tall sort of like vase, which really fits really well with the like the medium wall heights that we have going on throughout this entire build. And I did also make sure to change a lot of these sort of like source lights into different lights that sort of like fit the area a lot more. So although I did utilize quite a lot of source lights throughout the entire build where it was like necessary, I did try to like make sure to change some of the lighting fixtures to fit the area and the environment that it was kind of in, which I feel like made the home look a bit more homey, if that makes sense, and a bit more like realistic rather than having saucer lights everywhere. Although they do provide a lot of light, it is kind of important to utilize the lighting fixtures to make everything sort of like tie in together, especially with like the sort of like color scheme that you're going for. But yeah, moving on to the laundry room, we do actually have a very nice sort of like small laundry room off to the side of this sort of like curved room, which I really do actually like using and creating in a lot of my modern builds, mainly because I just feel like a lot of these modern houses do have specific rooms just dedicated to sort of like doing laundry, and I wanted to replicate that, especially in such a huge modern mansion like this, as well as like my other previous mansions as well. I do like creating these like small little like laundry rooms, and I actually utilize my favorite color scheme for these specific laundry rooms, which is sort of like this baby blue color, and I'm actually utilizing the cottage living kitchen counters as well as like that cozy bistro wallpaper, which I feel like ties in really well together. And I just added some extra clutter here and there into that room just to make it feel a bit more like a laundry room. And we do actually have this very huge sort of space in the center of the home, which has like these very huge sliding doors which sort of like meet the front of the home with the back of the home. And since it was a very open space, I wanted there to be a lot of seating as well as like a dining table or some sort of like office sort of like meeting space, if that makes sense. And I also accompanied it with a very nice colorful rug, which made it stand out a lot more. And we're actually moving on to the first bedroom that we have on the first floor. We do actually have two different bedrooms assigned on the first floor, I believe, and this is actually one of them, which is like off to the side of the sort of like garden area. And I just really love how this specific bedroom turned out in particular, mainly with that curved wall where we have that sort of like Dream Home Decorator curved seater, as well as like that curved sort of like mirror look that I was kind of going for, which I feel like worked really well. And I honestly love the color scheme going on throughout this entire room, which is sort of like this like muted brown color, but we also have like this forest green sort of color, which really ties in really well together. And we do actually have a very nice gym opposite that room that we were just in, which has pretty much every single gym equipment needed, as well as like unusable love struck sort of like dumbbell rack, which I really do enjoy utilizing in my build as well. And I do actually utilize quite a lot of these like dark wall and floor textures, mainly because I wanted it to contrast with that really high bright light that was coming from the saucer lights. And we do also have a very nice indoor sort of basketball area, which replicates the exact same one that you would see in the real house as well, because I just really like the way it looked, and it was kind of like an interesting thing to incorporate in a house, because I don't really do these sort of things in these mansions where I create some sort of like specific huge music room or some sort of like basketball area. So it was kind of like a nice change to incorporate something like this in this build as well. And I had just like a bunch of these black columns and these very nice black spandrels that sort of like meet all together, which really tied in really well with connecting those lights that were like hanging down from the ceiling as well. But yeah, moving on to the second floor, we have this very huge sort of like landing area, which I kind of just like purposed as a very nice sort of like seating area. And I also utilized a very nice piano additional seating area off to the back of the stairway. And we're actually moving on to one of the biggest bedrooms that we have on the second floor, which I kind of consider the master bedroom, mainly because it has its own ensuite as well as its own walk-in wardrobe, which most of the other bedrooms don't really have, besides the ensuites, because most of the bedrooms in this house do actually have an ensuite but don't sort of have that walk-in wardrobe closet sort of thing that I was placing in most of my master bedrooms. And I actually incorporated a very nice sort of like living space inside of this bedroom, mainly because we just had so much space to utilize, and I feel like it kind of made sense to have some sort of area in the bedroom to sort of like relax in without having to like sort of leave your room, if that makes sense. And I did also incorporate a very nice sort of like desk area if the sim needed to use anything from like a computer. And I do actually show the build process of the bathroom despite not showing most of the other ones, mainly because this is sort of like the one connected to the biggest bedroom. So it's kind of just like a showcase of like how I actually build these bathrooms, and it's pretty much the same process throughout all the bathrooms and en-suites, besides having like the same color swatches and whatnot. So each ensuite would have like their own designated sort of like color swatches and whatnot. So yeah, that's pretty much like the only differences between all of the bathrooms in the entire home, but they pretty much have like the entire same style and whatnot, as well as like the clutter as well. So yeah, this is also the small sort of like walk-in wardrobe area that the sim can utilize. And I did also include that spa day glowing sort of like light mirror, which I really do love utilizing in most of my bedrooms. And we're actually moving on to the nursery, which sort of like looks out towards the front of the home. And I really like the way I positioned that sort of like cottage that looks out towards the window. And I did actually utilize some of the objects that came from Growing Together, as well as the storybook nursery kit, just to like make it feel as cozy as possible while utilizing all the objects that I wanted to use, such as like that very nice rocking chair, which could also be substituted from the rocking chair that came from the Growing Together expansion pack, as well as like that very nice sort of like bookshelf object that I really love utilizing as well. And I do also utilizing that sort of like custom sort of wardrobe design, and including that baby clothing that came from the storybook nursery kit, which I feel like is so nice. And this is actually the final bedroom that I do actually showcase within the sort of like speed build, mainly because it would just take such a long time to showcase every single bedroom in one video. But you guys will definitely see pretty much every single room in the house tour towards the end of the video, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But I just really love how this bedroom in particular turned out, mainly because I just really like the colorway. I just feel like it looks really mature, and I just really like the simple muted like browns and like beige color scheme that we have going on throughout this entire room. And I just really like every single object, how it ties in really well. I didn't utilize a lot of like the generic objects that I use in every single bedroom. I do actually like switching it up here and there for most of my bedrooms by utilizing, let's say, like the book nook sort of like modular bookshelf pieces, or if it's like a different walk-in wardrobe rather than using Dream Home Decorator modular ones, as well as like using different clutter pieces, as well as like a different desk for the actual like main bedroom, if that makes sense. So it just sort of like ends up turning out to be a unique sort of designed bedroom that doesn't look all the same, if that makes sense. So none of the bedrooms in this house relatively look the same, especially because there were so many different colorways utilized throughout every single bedroom, different objects, different types of bed types and couches and whatnot, as well as like the clutter, like all of it sort of like ranges, especially because some of them don't even have en-suites. I believe it's just like these two bedrooms off to like the right hand side of the home, which is including the one that we recently just finished like creating, and that one is the only one that doesn't have the en-suite, as well as like the one above it. And this is actually the small bathroom that we have sandwiched between those two non-en-suite bedrooms, which I'm just sort of like decorating right now, just adding a bunch of clutter and just like creating it in a unique way, and just like adding a bunch of like my own sort of like designs, especially like with incorporating that sort of like thin kitchen wall cabinet alongside this like very modern looking bathroom sink unit, which I feel like always works really well together. You just need to use the number 9 key to raise up objects if you want to add clutter to it. And I did also go around the entire home, just like add a bunch of details and a lot more like clutter and stuff like that. As you guys can see so far right now, we're just like populating the hallway with a bunch more objects and like seating areas, changing some of the lighting fixtures and whatnot, just to make it look a bit more realistic and interesting, as well as adding a lot more objects for the exterior, such as like a nice outdoor seating area, as well as like some nice sun lounges, as well as like a lot of greenery and like trees and whatnot. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this entire speed build. So thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you guys think by leaving a like and subscribing, and also comment down below what you guys think about this build in the comment sections below. And I do also have a bunch more videos like this on the channel if you guys are interested in things like this. And thank you very much again for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.